All right, I suppose we can get started. We're maybe 1 minute early, but I'll do a bit of an introduction and then we'll get moving. So I think Mother Nature wanted us all here together today in the sense that it's kind of one of those dreary, rainy days where you would be considering doing some sort of indoor project with some storage or some of the clutter areas of your house. So it seems appropriate that it's not one of the beautiful days that we had on the weekend where everybody's like, I think I got other things to do than come to the museum and doing a speaker series. So our speaker series has grown so much, and I have not had the pleasure of being the guest speaker for quite some time because we've had such a consistent ongoing program of wonderful local historians and writers that have been contributing their research and coming to the speaker series. So I don't even remember the last time that I, as a representative of the museum, was also the speaker for this. So this is great to be back and to have this opportunity to talk to you all. My name is Dr. Stephanie Radu. I originally did most of my education with the University of Western Ontario. I did my master's and my PhD there on the topic of house museums. So it's appropriate that I'm here in the former village of Beachville working at the former Downing House and preserving local history here. I've been at the museum for 7 years roughly, and my job here as curator and manager is really to oversee all of the exhibits, the collection, our programs and events, and really just highlight the local histories of Zora Township and Southwest Oxford Township. So so if there's any questions that you folks have about the museum or the speaker series or anything, because I'm your guest today, I also have a lot of on-site information if you're looking for that. I want to just highlight a few upcoming events for the Society and the museum. If you're not aware, you're not following us on social media where we've been pushing all our local events and whatnot. We do have our summer camp coming up in July. Registration is open for that. Some PA day camps for the little ones in the area will be running through May and June. Our car shows are kicking off for the season on May 25th, so if you haven't been out to those, make sure you make an effort to come and see the grounds full of wonderful classic vehicles. We also have a baseball anniversary coming up. For many of you who drive through Beachville or are familiar with our village signs that show our lovely baseball player on our signs, Beachville celebrates the first recorded game of baseball in North America every year in June. That first recorded game was played on June 4th, 1838, and so we'll be celebrating the anniversary on May 31st this year, which is the weekend just before that anniversary date. It falls on a Wednesday. And so this year we're having a baseball burgers and buddies event. It's family friendly. We're going to do some reenactment games that are played according to the old rules. We're going to have the Beachville Legion here cooking lunch for everybody, and some wonderful exhibitors joining us that have a real passion for local Canadian baseball. Some representatives from the Inter-County Baseball League, from the London Majors Alumni Association. We have one of Canada's only official bat makers from the MLB who will be here to show how bats are made today and comment on how they differed and how they were made back in the 1800s. We're going to have some wonderful baseball artifacts out. We have the Ontario Cup visiting us right now. That is the earliest baseball trophy given to the champions of the Inter-County Baseball League. And we're going to have some bats that were, and bat lays that were used by the Corey brothers in Sweetburg to make bats way back when as well. So if you haven't registered for that event, you can do so online, and please do join us. It's a really, it's conceived of as a social event outside on the grounds where we can just talk baseball and play some games and have some fun. So look for all of that. The other one I'm also mentioning here tonight is Beyond the Highland Games, the Zora Caledonian Society story. This is really to keep the Scottish heritage of Embra and Zora alive. And so the event is going to be held Wednesday, June 4th, 11 to noon at the Embro Community Center lobby, and it's no charge to participate, and it's sort of in collaboration with the Zora Heritage Committee and the Beachville and District Historical Society. So there's more information about this if anybody's looking for it at the end of the speaker series. All right, so we're at 7:03. See, I said we should get started 1 minute early. We're not too far in, so that's great. I have a fast pace when I'm going over upcoming events, but I will slow down for the talk so everybody can follow along. So what is the importance of talking about our heirlooms at this point in time? One of the things that our communities are really experiencing is that 2 generations are downsizing at the same time right now. So you might know that your parents are aging, maybe they're moving into a home or a smaller residence, and you yourself might be downsizing at the same time. And so there's a lot going on as far as trying to find places for your family heirlooms. The pandemic also provided us with a lot of downtime where people were stuck in their houses going, oh, now's the perfect time to, bite off this decluttering project. We're in spring cleaning mode potentially, so the timing is great for this. But why does the museum want to be a part of this conversation? Our museum has 15,000 artifacts in our collection. And for a small local history museum, that's a lot of artifacts to care for. And largely our collection is built up by private donations. So individuals coming to us and saying, this was my grandmother's, they lived in Salford, this is my grandmother's, they lived in Harrington. I'm looking for a home for it, right? It doesn't belong in the dump, it doesn't belong with my children, it belongs somewhere where the public can appreciate it and use it to signify or to learn more about the past. So in that being such a huge part of our mission and our responsibility as a museum, we have a lot of people come through the doors throughout the year, and this might surprise some of you, but it's a constant flow of people coming through the doors saying, this is what I was left with, this is what I have, would you take it? Is there a home for it here? Would you put it on display? And so we have those regular meetings with potential donors to go over the significance of these pieces, and in some moments we're looking at it going, wow, you did a great job of caring for this for the 50 years you had it, and in other cases we're going, unfortunately we can't take it because it's too deteriorated or we don't have a story associated with it anymore or whatever it might be. So it's really important for us to share with the community how to do that stewarding work, the stewardship work of maintaining your family heirlooms. We're not interested in pulling out anybody's heirlooms and saying, bring it to us, give it to us. This is on your time, right? And so knowing that you are doing wonderful work as stewards means that it can come to us whenever it's ready, or it might not be that we're the home for it, but really we want to make sure that our local heritage and our local histories are preserved, and so sharing knowledge about that is really important to us. So, and you're also going to find in some of the topics that I'm going to talk about today that the roles you play as stewards really align with the same professional work we do here at the museum. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I don't want that to be intimidating, because so often when you attend these types of talks or you listen to these types of recordings or videos on YouTube about how to preserve your family heirlooms, you go, oh great, well if I had a museum budget or if I had a 4-year degree in conservation, maybe that would be feasible for me. I'm not looking to give you that kind of advice today. I'm not trying to teach you all how to be museum curators or conservators. I'm really trying to give you something that's a bit manageable, that you can go home, and really what I want you to take away is some small step you can take forward, okay? So don't think about this as, please don't get overwhelmed as we go through it going, oh I gotta do this, I gotta do this, and oh my gosh, what if it's at risk this way? No, just look at where you're at right now with it and try to take the next logical step forward. And anything you can do to improve the state of your objects, your heirlooms, is going in the right direction, and so it's really worth your time and worth your effort. So you wouldn't be here for a talk like this if you didn't really care about your family histories and your family heirlooms. Okay, so let's jump in. I've kind of broken this presentation down to 3 different areas. And I hope what you'll do when you read it is recognize that it involves the past, present, and future of your heirlooms. So the questions that we're starting with are, where did my family heirlooms originate? Where are my family heirlooms now? And where would I like my heirlooms to be in the future? Whenever we do planning has to take stock of where did we come from, what are we going to do now, what are our steps, and what is the goal, right? So those are the 3 questions that you're going to have in your mind, and we'll go through each of them individually. And what you will notice is these 3 questions align with kind of 3 main moments, which is collecting the stories, okay, that involves your research and your detective work, which the museum does on a regular basis, trying to figure out where our artifacts came from. Where my family heirlooms now takes into consideration, where are you storing them? Are they safe where they're being stored? What's involved in terms of negotiating the future plans for them? Who has control of them now, and how do I work with those individuals or my family members to make sure that they're preserved so they can reach the goal or their future location? And then where would I like my heirlooms to be in the future? So we will talk a little bit about plans for making sure that your heirlooms stay in your family. plans for making sure that your heirlooms go to a new owner that really appreciates them, making plans for your heirlooms to go somewhere where they would maybe be utilized, making sure that you're thinking about the different value that you attach to your heirlooms so that you can determine the right location for them to go. And we will talk a little bit about, if you have a goal of seeing your heirlooms go into a museum, things to be mindful of or to think about as you're going through that process. So lots to kind of cover, and hopefully breaking it down to these 3 sections and having these questions on your mind will keep you kind of going through with the presentation. So, how many people here have family heirlooms that they either currently own or expect to inherit? Show of hands. Okay. I hear people laughing. I think that's an overwhelmed laugh, maybe. How many people here feel that they have concretized a plan, that you have a solid plan for what you're going to do with those heirlooms? Okay, 1. Bert, you can leave then if you've got a plan. I don't know what I can teach you.
I've already sent a bunch of stuff to Australia, so.
Great. Well, and it's worth, we do after the talk have an opportunity for some refreshments and some questions and some socializing. So, talk to each other about it, because you're all in kind of the same place if you're all dealing with some questions about what to do with your family heirlooms. Okay, so yes, planning is at the core of making sure that your pieces make it into the next generation. So that's what we're going to go on with. Okay, so what gets in the way of planning? Feeling that you have plenty of time for the project. So I'll get to it when I have time. We'll talk about it later. It's going to get in the way of your project planning. A lack of information or access to resources. I don't know how to care for these objects. I don't know whether anyone would be interested in them. Those are types of questions that you're asking yourself. Being overwhelmed can be a hurdle to getting to the planning stage. There's just too much stuff. I don't even know what is in that box. Okay, those types of things going through your head. Feeling responsible for fulfilling others' wishes. This can be a huge weight on your shoulders. I don't know what she would have wanted or what he would have wanted. That can really get in the way of the planning stages too, because it's paralyzing, right? It sort of freezes you up. And then the weight of mortality and grief. I don't want to talk to him about what happens after he passes. I don't want to think about what will happen to the objects when I am gone. So there's a lot of things that can kind of get in the way of planning, and hopefully with some really concrete steps forwards and some discussion about how to make small improvements, that will sort of lift some of those weights. Many people do experience relief in knowing that they have a plan. This means leaving your family with the tools and directions that will help them deal with your belongings and your family heirlooms. And there are so many tools that you have at your fingertips that can help you. So we're going to look at how you can document and research your heirlooms, how you can care for the objects while they're in your possession, and how you can plan for the future of your objects. So those are kind of, again, tied to those 3 questions that I first started off with. So I'm just going to show you those point forms of what's going to get in the way of your planning, so you can think about if any of these have been the reasons why you haven't gotten started, or if they're getting in the way of your ongoing progress. Okay, so for our first question that we talked about, where did my family heirlooms originate? And each time we go through our next of the 3 questions, you're going to see this baby come back up. So just know that that's kind of the marker of the next section. So imagine you're the baby in the bathtub. This question, where did my family heirlooms originate, represents the point of departure for your planning and decision-making processes. It is also the question that drives your detective work. Sometimes discovering the history behind a family heirloom is a rewarding and wonderful experience that brings you closer to your family. Other times it is a frustrating process that yields little information and a bunch of dead ends. The latter possibility can make an individual feel farther removed from their family histories. So answering this question, discovering and documenting the artifact stories, allows you to assign a value to the piece. So this might mean the more you learn about the object, the more sentimental value you can attach to the piece. Or the more you learn about an object can mean that you can attach more monetary value to the piece, or a greater historical value. Some items might seem unimportant or undesirable, but the full story may capture your heart and inspire a different plan for its future. This might instigate a change of fate from sale or disposal to safeguarding and sharing. So really doing the research up front will determine that last piece, which is what is the goal for your item. Museums, archives, and historical societies across the country can be of help through research requests. We have some wonderful resources in Oxford County that help with genealogical research and artifact preservation and conservation advice, so make sure that you have that on your mind too. It can be somewhat intimidating to reach out to those institutions, but this should be another reminder in the speaker series format that we are here and we do want to be involved. Okay, so moving on, this is just the summary. Your question is your point of departure for decision making and planning. Detective work is required. Your stories give your heirlooms their value, and don't forget your local museum, archive and genealogical society, or historical society can help. Okay, provenance. Provenance is from the French word provenir, which means to come from. Provenance is a record of previous ownership, custody, and location of a valued object, such as a work of art or an artifact. A full provenance provides a documented history that can help prove ownership, assign the work to a particular context, and establish the work's or object's authenticity. Now, for those of you who can't read this, I'm going to see, this is a little glass dish from someone's house, and it says on its little piece of paper that's just jammed right in, it says, nothing special about this, but it is nice. For Audrey, for olives, pickles, etc. Okay? Now this one has its little wire tag on it and a little paper that says wedding gift 1954. Okay, so sometimes relatives or former owners of an object can pass along a complete story. Sometimes those materials are lost or fragmented and you will need to piece together the provenance from various pieces of evidence. So this is something, right? This is something to go off. It's not a lot. Wedding gift 1954 doesn't tell you whose wedding gift, arguably, depending on the context in which you find it. It could give you a sense, obviously, it's my mom's that was in her china cabinet. But even that can sometimes be a presumption that doesn't prove to be true. So look at these little pieces of evidence. You might be able to find receipts, original manuals, photographs of the item in context. Be on guard or be on the lookout for all of this type of information. You may also conduct research through manufacturer's mark. Every time you pick up something, you know the process of turning it over and seeing if there's anything on the back. If it's a photo, is the names on the back? If it's a piece of pottery, what's on the bottom, okay? Every sort of artifact, you want to look at it in the round to see are there any hints on the physical object that can help with my research. Okay, so after you've done your investigation of the object, you've looked for receipts, you've looked for photos of where the artifact or the object was situated in the house, or who wore it or who utilized it, the next thing is to document that research. So you don't want to have read that tag that said wedding 1954 and have gone through all the work of figuring out who this was by talking to your mom or talking to your grandma or talking to your grandpa. You don't want to go online and go look for, what blacksmith is responsible for this stamp or what pottery, group made this piece of pottery. You don't want to do all that research only to have it in your head and not put it down on paper. So do the research, step 1. Step 2, document your research. So asking your questions, what documents came with the object when I acquired it? How did I come to possess the object? That's part of that provenance, so write down how did you come to possess it? How long have you had it? Where did you store it? What stories do I remember about the object or its history? I have a number of these little family heirloom documentation worksheets, which is just a giant list of questions. But if you read and answer these questions for any particular heirloom in your possession, you're going to get a pretty robust provenance that can then be used to explain the significance of your piece, either to the next generation or to the museum you're donating it to. So if you want one of these, I can give you a hard copy or I can tell you where I found it. It's not from the museum here, it's one that's easily found online, but it's a really good way to kind of just start asking those questions. If you can't think, what's the story of this object? Follow the prompts, write it all down, find a way to attach it to your objects. So that's the documentation piece. Okay, the other thing that's so often forgotten, and we see this with donors that come in with something in a box and say, I don't know much about this stuff, and they just drop the box with the artifacts and we talk about it and we look at it and we go, well, what do you know, who did this belong to? And they might go, I don't know very much. And then we just, lo and behold, we look on the box and there's something written on the box, So the tag is one thing, but some of it can be on your, the label that includes who it was mailed to or things like that. So never take, if you're going through someone's house or you're going through your own heirlooms and you're taking it out of the box, stop for a second, pause, look at where it's coming out of, because sometimes even a whole group of objects might be sorted together and you weren't even aware that there is some method to the madness as to how it was sorted. So take a minute to just pause and go, where is it coming from? What am I noticing on how it's packaged? That can sometimes lead to another piece of information that might be valuable to you as you're trying to document where it came from and what its significance is. So whenever removing an object from its home, consider documenting its location. It might lend more information down the road too. So we're gonna go back to this, where are my family heirlooms now? But again, look at the photo and think. These crystal bathroom accessories might still be in the same place as they were when you were the little one in the bathtub, okay? If your mother decides she wants to give you the crystal containers that she always used to sit in her bathroom, you could use this image to describe her activities in the bathroom even after the house has been emptied of their possessions. Take another photograph of the pieces in her bathroom before you remove them. Those side-by-side images can illustrate the story of a large portion of the object's timeline. If you say, when I was a kid, they were there. When I emptied her house, they were there. Those two pictures can really capture that duration of that piece's life, and certainly can be used to explain even to your children or grandchildren how precious they were to your grandmother, how much they were involved in the commotion that was in the bathtub at the time, or the bathroom at the time. And so really take a moment again to think about, when you're removing something from a location, is it worth capturing the context in which they were stored, displayed, etc. Okay, so moving on to the second question, where are my family heirlooms now? Where the objects are currently stored or based will influence who you are going to be dealing with. Planning is often intergenerational. You may be transferring the object from your grandparents' house to your house, or from your house to your child's house. Your heirlooms may still need to pass through the hands of a few other stewards. If this is the case, you must understand that you are a part of a team effort to preserve the heirlooms, and many opinions will have to be factored in as you plan ahead for these objects. Secondly, this question is important because in order for objects to make it to the next generation, and for your future plans to be achievable, you must make sure the objects are preserved and cared for properly, with the intention of long-term maintenance and transferal. Okay, so first, let's think very literally about where your heirlooms are. Granny is dropping off her stuff. Those of you who are already the designated keepers of your artifacts know where you're storing the artifacts in your care. The rest of you, here's a hypothetical situation. Granny is coming by and dropping off a selection of heirlooms that she can no longer store or care for. Where would you put these items, keeping in mind your actual current situation? Where in your home would you have room? Suggestions.
Not in a furnace room.
Not in the furnace room, okay? Anybody receiving heirlooms, where did they go when you first received them? Or if you're gonna receive a new batch, the garage, okay?
No.
Spare room closet.
Spare room closet, okay? Where else are they stored? Those of you who have them, many of you said you have them, are they
Attic.
in the attic, okay?
That was a good place.
In tubs.
In tubs?
Yep.
Rubber bins? Yep, okay.
All over my house.
All over my house, okay. All right, so, here we go. Common places where they get located: in a garage, in an attic, in a basement, in a storage container. Okay, so what are some risks that we can see or that we can think of using these locations for storage of your priceless heirlooms?
Too damp, too dry.
Too damp, too dry,
Too
Mine.
hot.
too hot?
Mice.
Mice, pests, yeah. All right, we're biting off some of them. So think of basements as attics, as the least monitored and most environmentally hazardous spaces in your house. Most prone to temperature fluctuations and high humidity. There's a higher risk of flooding in basements and an accumulation of dust and dry air in attics. Dust and dry air are both agents of deterioration. Risk of flooding, we know water can be a major agent of deterioration. Any fluctuations in temperature, too hot, too cold, a mixture of hot and cold, are all bad for the majority of our materials. But we also have to think of exposure to traffic and handling in your other spaces of the house. So if they are in a high traffic zone, that's a risk. If they're in a space where they're going to be handled by young ones, grandkids running around, that's a hazard to your heirlooms. You can also think of the risk of theft. Don't store your jewelry in your master bedroom. That is where they're going to assume it is. Maybe a safe is called for. So thinking about these types of spaces of where it's going to go is a very key element of keeping your artifacts or your objects safe. Oops, okay. Did I say that? Okay, so 10 primary threats to your heirlooms. Physical forces, impact, vibration, pressure, abrasion, fire, pests, mold, yes, is a living thing, so it counts as a pest there. Light, ultraviolet, infrared, humidity, incorrect temperature, thieves and vandals, water, pollutants, and dissociation, which we'll come back to for those of you who might not go. What is disassociation? Okay, so think about these as elements of the enemies of your heirlooms. Mitigating these threats needs to be part of your planning. These forces and environmental hazards can lead to damage or total loss of your heirlooms. So, if you're reading like about ultraviolet light and rodents and soot damage and smoke discoloration and hydrogen sulfide and you're going, this is all over my head, that is totally fine. This is what you need to take away as far as mitigating these threats. To protect against these hazards, you need to be armed with awareness. So, making sure when I say that the garage and the attic are some of the least monitored areas of the house, that means you probably put it up there 15 years ago and haven't checked in on it since. Awareness, spending time with the artifacts or the objects is key. Check in on them. Because even if you can't identify what is doing the damage, if you're seeing that damage is happening, you can arm yourself using other tools to make sure that that damage is paused or halted in some way, or you can bring it to a conservator to kind of deal with it professionally. But really your first responsibility as far as dealing with these threats is monitoring, okay? So watching it, check in on it, say, every few years I'll check in on it. Every year when I do my spring clean, I'm gonna pull it out and see how it's doing. So awareness is key. The other piece is knowing your object's weakness. So when we talk about conservation, we somewhat think about it in batches, and I'll give you a really excellent tool for looking at it in batches. But really being aware, like, what is paper most susceptible to versus what are my textiles most susceptible to versus, you know, what is the best way to take care of photographs? Every individual item doesn't need to be looked at as exactly how it needs to be treated, but some awareness of those batches, like if you have if your heirlooms are a ton of antique tools, you can at least do a little bit of research to figure out what do those objects specifically need. So what are their weaknesses and what do they need? And then really just attending to any changes in the object. So if you're seeing, oh, my object is corroding, or oh, my object is starting to tear, or oh, this photo used to be white, now it's yellow. Those types of pieces are ones that you can easily look up, and then with a Google search or some consultation with major conservation like notes, you can figure out how do I halt this or how do I attend to this. So awareness, checking on the artifacts, those are your key ways to start dealing with some of the threats. Watch for things like discoloration, cracking, dusting, etc. So, light and pollutants can both be major agents of deterioration, so limit the amount of direct exposure to light. Many of our heirlooms, it's the same way with our artifacts in the museum. We love the idea that all 15,000 of our artifacts would be on display. It's not good for them. Being exposed to light is not good for heirlooms, especially natural light. So, you know, I was listening to one podcast recently that was saying, oh, if you're taking your heirlooms out to show them, make sure it's at nighttime or you've got your drapes down, and I'm going, that's a lot, like that is a lot. But as far as thinking about where you're storing them, do consider light exposure. Things like papers, photographs, textiles, and drawings can really fade or yellow over time from constant exposure to light. So just be thinking about light as an element, threat. And pollutants can also cause the acidification of papers, the corrosion of metals, discoloration, scratching, etc. So be thinking about that as far as like, oftentimes when we talk about pollutants, you might be going, well, what do you mean? It's stuff in the air, okay? It's a lot of stuff in the air, and when none of us are, I mean, if you're into major chemistry, great for you. But sometimes that chemistry is really hard for us to exactly understand. Things like storing your artifacts in a wood cabinet, because wood can, what we say, is off gas, or there's certain elements that have more acid in them than others. that can cause these kind of chemical reactions. They can create these like chemical soups that your artifacts can be trapped in. So when I say pollution, it's really that interaction of various elements that can be damaging to your artifacts. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. One little note is make sure that you have proper insurance for your valuable pieces, and this is in the conversation of threats to your items. So you might want to solicit an official appraisal. Most home insurance plans will list a maximum payment per item that's destroyed or lost or taken. So ask whether this limit is higher than the value of your family heirloom. That might be really important to talk to your insurance provider about. If the item has a high value on its own, you may need to purchase an additional insurance rider add-on for your existing policy. So yeah, just be mindful of that as well as we're talking about the threats that are making you stressed out about what might be happening to your artifacts or your objects. Okay, so this particular slide is talking about incorrect relative humidity, and I love these images because they resonate with me as both a homeowner and a museum curator. So what they're showing you is this tiny little diagram of this house, but it's saying, okay, think about surface drainage, what's coming out of my eavesdrops, what's draining off the soil into my basement, rainwater from my eaves, like heat in my attics, exterior walls, having things close to my exterior walls, what kind of risk is that? Or having things close to my heating systems, which was already mentioned, is don't put your stuff in your furnace room. And then with regards to anything that could be extra humidity or dryness, they have this diagram that shows like a storage area. So think about this as your basement. You've got item B, which is just resting right on the floor. There's a lot of risk there as far as flooding. You've got item D, which is a larger piece, which has been draped, which is great for dust cover, but it's still resting with a dust cover on the floor. So there's no ventilation under your item, okay? So that's something to be mindful of. Anything too close to the walls, which we mentioned, not good. Anything too close to the dry, hot ceiling, not good. So this is showing you a bit of a rejig where you've lifted up some of your items off the floor, you've made sure nothing is resting right on the floor, everything's a bit away from those major exterior walls that can create those humidity fluctuations and temperature fluctuations, and a little bit of ventilation in the room, which tends to some of the moisture and some of the air quality pieces. So again, it's a simplified diagram, but it helps you think about the containment of your objects and the way that you're designing the storage for them, or planning the storage around them. Okay, so that's kind of the larger conversation about threats and the larger conversation about storage itself. And I want to provide some examples before I talk about, this is just incorrect temperatures. I'll provide you with a citation of where this stuff comes from. The other potential source of harm is handling. So you can see an example here. You're not going to want to hold an object that has a tiny little handle like this by the handle. And it's really hard not to do that because we're so familiar with the way objects are supposed to be utilized that you're just going to grab something by the handle because it's the handle. But think about where there's vulnerabilities on your objects when you're handling them because that handle could fall right off as it deteriorates or gets a bit older. So thinking about how you're handling is really, really important. This is the absolute nightmare of anybody who loves their family heirlooms or cares about their heirlooms, is picking it up and dropping it, right? Or shattering something that you got and just watching it and going, oh my gosh. So making time, especially if you're moving heirlooms or moving them into your house, out of your house. I've just told you not to keep it in your basement or your attic. You're going to go home and move stuff. Plan how you're going to move that. Make sure you look at the path you're going to take. Make sure there's nothing you can trip on. Make sure there's not a door handle that's going to scratch your cupboard front door. Look at how you're moving it. Take the time to do that before you start. Because object handling can be something where you could really harm or damage your artifacts or your objects. Same thing with this chair. You don't want to be levering it right by the back of it. Just a nice, easy lift up from the base. Okay, so before we get into proper packaging, I'm going to show you some examples. These are all from our museum collection, but they're manageable as far as your private resources and things like that too. So I've got two examples of gloves here. These are the ones that we prefer to use as far as cotton gloves, but during the pandemic, there is a sort of discontinuation of using cotton because you can't dispose of them quite as easily and they're not as cheap as the nitrile ones are. So you can get some of these pretty cheaply at a Shoppers Drug Mart or probably at the Costco or whatnot. So you can go either way. I'm going to use the cotton ones today. But these ones are actually sometimes better if you're dealing with documents because they're not as clunky on your fingers. I'm going to show you some examples of some textiles. We'll start with those because those are kind of really great concrete examples. So I have a textile here, and I don't know if you can see it when I lift it up here. Do you guys see the major crease at the bottom there, like 3 inches, 4 inches up here? This is because it was folded when it was being stored, okay? When you have textiles, you want to lay them flat as much as you can in a storage box that's big enough for the actual piece. And if it's absolutely necessary for you to fold it, you don't want to lay it like that, because now you've got that fold and that fold is going to stay in, and also there's going to be extra strain on that fold, that portion of your textile. So what we love to use, and it's a lovely term for us, is a sausage roll. So if you do have to fold your textiles, you're going to use your tissue paper. You're going to roll it, roll it, roll it, so you've got a nice sausage roll. And when you store this, wherever you're folding it, support the fold, okay? Can you kind of see that?
Yeah.
So the fold is there to prevent that strong crease that's just not good for the textile. This particular piece of fabric is very structured, so it's not something that's just cotton that kind of rolls nice and folds nice and unfolds nice. It's very firm, and so that fold is kind of stuck there. So it's one of those things when you're storing it that you want to make sure you're supporting it with some tissue paper. Now there is a difference when you're buying tissue paper. When you buy tissue paper, you can go to your dollar store and buy tissue paper. It might have this glossy look to it. Do not do that, okay? If you're also thinking about how you're packaging your artifacts, your heirlooms, anything that has color that might not be steadfast, do not utilize. So when I say use tissue paper for these sausage rolls, don't go into your gift packing box and grab some blue tissue and wrap it on your nice little linens here. You want to be using white, and ideally you want to be using archival quality tissue paper. Now there's 2 distinct types of archival quality tissue paper. There's buffered and unbuffered. And buffered basically has this additional component that is alkaline, so anything that gets too acidic in a box, the buffering layer deacidifies it in storage and makes sure it doesn't get too acidic for things like yellowing or whatnot. And the unbuffered tissue paper just doesn't have that alkaline component in it. So anything that's made with kind of animal materials, anything that's silk, wool, leather, kind of as a general decision-making tool, anything that's made with those animal materials, you don't want to be using the buffered version. You want to be using unbuffered. So if you see those as you're buying your tissue paper, archival tissue paper, and you're kind of wondering what's the difference, just think, is it made from animal products or not, kind of, and that should help a little bit in terms of your decision-making. Okay, so that's one example, sausage rolls. Think sausage rolls. This is another example of a garment that was donated, and unfortunately this piece was suspended from a clothes hanger for a very long time in storage. And can you see the shredding that's happened at the sleeves? Now that's not where the hanger actually was supporting the dress. The hanger was up here at the shoulder, but the weight of the garment pulls, and shreds that whole sleeve down. So you think, oh, it's hanging in my closet, it's been hanging in my closet for years. Some textiles can hold up to that, some cannot. Something of this weight couldn't. So think about that when you've got it in your closet. Maybe it needs to be put in a nice box and some tissue paper lying flat rather than hanging up. Even on a padded hanger, it doesn't matter. It's about the weight more so than the point of contact, if that makes sense. So really be thinking about that. You're noticing when I'm lifting this up even to demonstrate or to show it to you, I'm supporting at the weight. And when you're handling, when we're talking about object handling, not dropping things and not yanking on the handles, with textiles, even if it doesn't look fragile, even if you're thinking, oh, my coat that I wear every day doesn't shred when I hold it up, but right by the shoulders, historic textiles are going to be different. So try to be mindful about how you're handling them and try to be mindful of the weight and also of hanging them. Okay, last example for textiles. This is a beautiful wedding dress, or yeah, it was actually a black wedding dress. Can everybody see black? Can you see the light damage?
Oh, that's light.
That's light damage.
I thought it was
A
gold
design.
finish.
No, that is purely light damage. So this is a very transparent, lightweight fabric, and the light has just gotten right to it. So again, when I talk about where you're displaying this stuff or how you're sharing it with your families or where it's being stored, that was a black garment, a purely black garment that has now seen all that light damage. And that's irreversible in some sense, right? Can you see it on the front here?
Yeah.
Versus the back? You can come and get a closer look if you want after the presentation, but it's again a very good example, a very stark example of what happens with light deterioration. Okay. Another example. Can everybody see the necklaces in here? Okay, one of the things that's very common is that everything gets thrown in a jewelry box, right? So you've got all your gemstones and beads and whatever, all just in a jewelry box. Maybe they're clanking around while you're going through them and bumping into each other and whatnot. That causes physical damage to them. It's like abrasion, right? So scraping against each other, rubbing against each other can really tarnish the pieces, scratch the pieces and whatnot. This particular housing approach for us, we've just used an Ethafoam and our lovely clamshell boxes. These are archival boxes that we use for a lot of storage in the museum. But what we've done is separate them by the divider to make sure that they're not clanking together or scratching each other. Now you can do this with tissue paper too. You don't need foam, you don't need to be carving out foam. The idea behind it is just to make sure that you don't have those things clanking together, rustling around in a box, wherever you're storing. Think about if there's too much contact between things. That's another important piece with storage. The other one I want to show you here is a book, a ledger from our collection. One of the things you'll notice that has such a historic feel to it is this leather that's gone really orange, okay? This is called red rot. It's major damage to the leather of the binding of the book. And if you see this on your historic books, just make sure you're aware that this comes from too much humidity, okay? So the leather is going to start powdering. You're going to start seeing wherever it's stored that there's kind of the little orange powder at the bottom. That's irreversible in one sense, and you really want to make sure that you're attending to, it can be stalled by attending to the humidity in your area, but it's just been exposed to too much humidity, and so the leather, and this is good, like a good example, it might not be a book, but anything that's leather based, if it starts showing that red, orange, brownish color, it means that it's too much humidity in your area for it. Okay. Photographs. I'm sure a lot of you have photographs. We love these little enclosures. Again, it's just an archivally safe sleeve. These are really easy to put stuff in. We've got a lovely example of a family photo here that's very happy in a sleeve like this, okay? If you're noticing that your photos are curling like this, sometimes those sleeves can be a really good kind of protection against that. But the other thing that the sleeves do is it provides that interleaving. And when I say interleaving, again, it's that barrier between the one on top and the one underneath, right? So you can put tissue between two items, two clothes, two photographs. But that means if I stack something on top of it now, there's none of the scratching of the surface of the photo or things like that. So the sleeves are really, really helpful. Now, the drawback of this sleeve, you don't see it, right? So you want to show your niece or you want to show your daughter this photo. What are you going to do? You got to pull it out, right? Well, when you pull it out, you're handling it. More handling means more risk of damage, as I'm showing you right now. So one of the things you can do if you don't want to use these archival sleeves that are made out of paper, you can get something like a mylar sleeve. And what's great about this is it helps you with the handling. So if it's inside, you can handle it, but you're not getting any of the oils from your hands on it. You're not risking contact with the surface, and you have that added visibility, which is really great for being able to show it. So if you think it's something you're showing off, might be better to go with like a mylar, which is like a polyester. This is not interchangeable for any type of plastic sleeve that you can get at the dollar store. You want to do your research to make sure it's like a mylar because there's a lot of plastics that are very unstable. When I say unstable, anytime I'm saying unstable, it means chemically there could be things that are off-gassing that create that chemical soup. You don't want a chemical soup where you're storing your photograph. You don't want a chemical soup where you're storing your wedding gown. You don't want a chemical soup where you're storing your family's jewels. So, you know, think about that your archival artifacts that you're boxing in should all be stable, and that means they have to be made out of certain types of materials. Mylar is a safe plastic to use for storage.
The Photoshop not have that?
You can, yeah. There's a lot that you can get them on Amazon. I mean, Mylar, but what I'm saying is you want to make sure when you're searching for it that you're verifying what material it's made out of. So there's certain plastics that are safe to store in and certain that are unstable and not safe to store in. And you can really get them on Amazon, but you have to search like archivally safe and just check what material they're made out of before you just go off a shelf. Because there are ones even in, like, I know there's one on Amazon, but I think there's ones even in Staples that will say on it exactly what it's made out of. And so just make sure you're doing your research and not assuming they're all made out of the same plastic, because they're not.
I never use, dollar store paid savers. I get the more expensive ones.
Yeah, and price isn't always an indicator of being archivally safe either, but you do improve the likelihood that it's a better plastic. But again, you just want to make sure, like a Mylar is really good. There's other polyester-based like plastics that are really good. But again, and I'll show you the resource to check on which ones are good and which ones aren't. We stick to Mylar, but there's other ones you can use. Okay, this housing for this document looks great, right? Maybe it's a family letter, whatever it might be. A, I can handle it. B, I can look at it. The problem is when they've done this work of enclosing it, they've used an adhesive tape, which is a clear adhesive tape, which nicely keeps both sides of the plastic together. The problem is this document slides, right? So now this document has slid to, say, the bottom of its enclosure. What is it in contact with now? The tape. So now when I try to unhouse this, there's a risk that it sticks and it won't come off the tape. So although it looks safe, and it is safe as long as I keep it in here, in a sense, it's not your best option because the tape at the bottom is still at contact with that document. Tape is the worst. Do not use tape. Don't use tape, don't use glue, okay? And for that matter, do not use paper clips, because your paper clips, your average paper clip is made out of metal, and what's it gonna do?
Rust.
And where's that rust gonna go?
On the picture.
On your picture, on your document, on, you know, the wonderful land deed that your parents left you.
It
So,
leaves an imprint too.
yeah, it does, absolutely. It creases the paper as well, the document. So, there are these archivally safe paper clips. They're so colorful and fun. We get these at the conservation supply store. You can go with something like this that is more stable, and although we typically stay with non-colored items, these are determined to be safe for artifacts. But as, again, you're saying, if you want to prevent the crimping of the page, don't go with a paper clip. But if you are going to go with a paper clip, do not go with a metal paper clip. If you are going to go with tape, which I don't say, don't go with tape. But if you are going to go with tape, there's a thing called linen tape, which is really good to use in contrast to something that's not archivally safe. You can find this online, but you can also find it at conservation supply stores. When I say conservation supply stores, it might seem like, oh, they only service museums or whatnot. You can ask for a catalog to be mailed to your house, and you can scroll through that catalog and see if anything is useful for your heirlooms. You can also call them on the phone and order your stuff, which is great because they can provide you with suggestions on measurements that you might need or things like that. So do not be intimidated. Look them up. There are Canadian stores as well, not just American providers at this particular point in time. So you can go online and find access to that too. The other one that we like to use for some of our larger documents, obviously if it's a larger document like this, one of the risks is it's bending, it's creasing, you might rip it. Like whenever it's a bit larger than something that can go into these little envelopes, we'll produce custom-made enclosures. This is not like the height of museum enclosure design. It's literally just two pieces of your cardstock kind of, or your map board. Okay, you can get map board at framing stores. You can order it online as well. And then there's that lovely little linen tape at the crease there. Okay, so it's not your adhesive, it's not a tape that's gonna kind of deteriorate and off gas. You got your linen tape, you got two pieces of your map board, and you got your document nicely inserted inside. Nothing too hard. You can cut it off with, you know, a little paper cutter or whatnot, an X-Acto blade, and all it does is provide that structure that this piece needs so it doesn't fold or crease or things like that. And you can lie it flat and store it under your bed, or not under your bed, on a nice shelf that's safe. Okay, so those are some examples of how to do proper packaging, how to think about what you're using to store your artifacts, etc. So we've got about 10 minutes, and I want to just go through some resources that you can utilize. The Canadian Conservation Institute is arguably our best resource in Canada for conservation knowledge, and they share a lot of wonderful notes and guides online. These are all free for you to access at any point in time. And what's nice is that they break it down. So caring for leather, skin, and fur, caring for metal objects, caring for outdoor objects, caring for paintings, caring for photographic materials, caring for plastic and rubbers, It's really accessible material overall. There's wonderful tables, diagrams, photographs that all describe what they're working on. And there's also typically some sort of email account that you can go to for additional information if you need. So this is, although it's something that us museum professionals really rely on, it's something you too can rely on. It's relatively accessible, and it's very well researched and very reliable as a source. So the Canadian Conservation Institute, this is their website. Take it down, use it as you will. Okay, the last part that we had said I was going to return to is this idea of dissociation. And remember these lovely tags. Now these tags didn't give us much as we discussed, but it's better than this. Okay? So when we talk about dissociation, it's an object that's left without its story. It's an object that's left without its provenance, as we discussed. This is a real risk as far as making sure it makes it to the next generation, because there's no value for something that has no story, okay? Because the story helps determine the monetary value, the sentimental value, the historic value. So we've got lovely tools like the Heirloom Registry. You guys can go look this up on YouTube. What they do, and I was going to show you a clip, but we're running out of time, so you can go look it up. But what they do is they provide these little placards and registration numbers that are unique, and then they process a basic, like a record online. So you would screw your plaque into the table that you so loved, and you can write online all the details about why this table's significance. And so anybody who finds that table, who goes online with that plaque number, can find the whole story online. That's one online tool, okay? And there's a minor fee, but it's not an annual fee. But really, it's not so much about promoting something like this. It's about, if you watch the YouTube video, you really get a sense of like how you have to create this connection between your paperwork and your artifact, okay? Because you don't want the story becoming dissociated. You don't want the story disappearing on the object. They have to be together. Okay, so your last question, where would I like my heirlooms to be? So, make time to explore several options for your heirlooms. It might on first thought seem like sale or donation or disposal are not options. So it really takes a certain amount of time to really consider what is the best place for this item to go. Understand what the value is on the market and to others before you make a decision. The other thing is some artifacts, or some objects I should say, might be looking like garbage, okay? That looks like garbage. Don't automatically assume it's garbage. This is the sort of thing where you can contact a conservator or go to a museum and say, if this were to receive some conservation treatment, would it be of value? Would it be historically relevant? Could it be displayed? Things like that. Don't just assume that something is garbage because of its condition. There can be instances where something works. All right, if you're looking to keep items in the family, there's things to be mindful of, okay? There's this moment in like 2017, 2018, where these were the sort of headlines you were seeing being published. Sorry, nobody wants your parents' stuff, or unwanted family heirlooms create a divide with aging parents. These are really heartbreaking stories where, you know, somebody's parent passed away and their other living parent said, oh, your mom really wanted this to have, or wanted you to have this, it was really important to her that you had it. And the kid goes, I don't want it, and that living parent gets really frustrated at that experience. And it can create this kind of like conflict, right? And that arises because you haven't had those conversations ahead of time to say, I want you to have this, and then the other person being able to say, I would like to have that too. Or, I don't see that fitting into my decor. Or, I don't know what to do with that object. Or, why would you want me to have that? I have no idea why that would be important to you. So those conversations being had is part of your planning process if you want to keep items in the family. The other thing you might need to be aware of is that you don't necessarily want your treasured keepsakes in a box like this that you hand over to your child and it never gets utilized and never appreciated and never shown. So there's some conversations that might happen if you're trying to keep it in the family where they talk, you have to have this open conversation with them where they might say, I don't think I'll use that. Like, we don't use doilies on our tables, right, anymore. Okay, well, what if I got it framed for you? Do you think it's something you could put on your wall, right? And the person might say yes. Or, you know, we don't really entertain as much as you did, Dad, so like I don't think we need any of these big, you know, trays. Okay, well, what if I installed it on your wall? Like, would that go with your decor? Like, there's different ways. Or, you know, there's this old suit your grandpa had. It's like, okay, well, why don't we make it into a nice pillow for your chair? So these modifications, if you have those conversations intergenerationally, can really lead to a really satisfactory transference of heirlooms, okay? And I love this particular article that says there's an heirloom challenge. Okay, your grandchild says, I don't want that, Grandpa, I don't want that, Grandma. It's like there's a challenge there. It's like you want them to have it, they don't want to have it. How do you get them to see it in their life? How do you get to the point where they can picture keeping it and loving it and respecting its history and sharing it with their kids? There is a challenge there, okay? Something like this where you've got two twin beds, and what they did was get it reworked to be their main bed. Some of this creative thinking, how you might have used it, how you might have stored it in your house, that might not be how it continues. When we talk about your heirlooms in the next generation, some of this creative work and some of this conversation is going to be part of how you take it into the next generation or make sure it goes into the next generation. In other instances, it might be that you've determined, you've done the research, you've looked at it, you've determined there's no sentimental value to you, okay, it's still in good condition. Maybe it gets donated, maybe it gets donated to a local library, maybe it gets donated to a local youth association that's doing a craft day, or maybe it's getting donated to, maybe your family was really into farming and your kids are not, and it might go to somebody else who's really into farming, 2 concessions down. There might be, if you make the time for figuring out where it's gonna go, you might find the perfect new owner for it. And so taking the time, getting the work started can be really helpful in finding the right place for it. There's also a lot of different places that do these types of clearing of homes, removing and disposing of items. I know in many cases it's really overwhelming to deal with an estate, and so there are tools that you can look at. And today there's way more opportunity for online sales and online marketplaces. And you might cringe at it, but truthfully, I have a friend of mine who her passion is taxidermy. How many of you love taxidermy? Okay, so in this room, if anybody's family has taxidermy, it's not going to your house. But there's someone online who is looking for taxidermy pieces, who is going to give those taxidermy pieces a loving home. And some of these point of sale websites will help you find that perfect owner who's going to really appreciate that family heirloom that's not for interest for you. If you're going to use these types of marketplaces, key piece of advice, take really good photos of it, because that helps people understand what you're giving. If it's not represented with good photos, it can sometimes be a little bit harder to find the right person. And then if you have a lot of your family heirlooms that you've determined are not of sentimental value, not of historic importance, and aren't going to a museum, and they're in really great condition of their high monetary value, you could also consider auction houses. Auction houses will not deal with estates that don't have that kind of higher monetary value items in many cases. So just be, again, mindful of like looking at each type of value and where its potential settling place is going to be. Now, I mentioned how important step 1 is what is the original importance of these artifacts. Going back to that idea of provenance, is it might be important to know the story if you're trying to keep it in the family, but it's also very important that you know the story of the item if you're looking to sell it, okay, if you're looking to auction it. Any of your artifacts that have a significant story will often garner higher valuations, so just be mindful of that. That's especially true of fine arts and fine arts pieces and artifacts. They will say that the values will be elevated. Think about if you have a pair of red ruby shoes, what value will that have on the market versus if you have the red ruby shoes that were used when they filmed Wizard of Oz. That story makes those shoes significantly more valuable, right? That kind of makes sense to everybody. So that provenance piece is important if you're looking to sell or if you're looking to donate some of your items as well. Okay, last little bit, donating to a museum. Many people are not aware that museums have to follow certain policies when they're acquiring pieces. So unfortunately, there are instances where someone will come through the door and they have a wonderful historical piece and they'll say, this is really historically important. And I'll go, it is extremely historically important. I can't collect it. My collections policy does not let me collect it. Now, what gets in the way of me being able to collect it? If you bring me something that was part of the early settlements in the Toronto area, I'm the Beachville District Museum. Ethically, I'm not allowed to collect Toronto artifacts unless they have some tie to the community in which I represent, because what that would furnish is bigger communities, larger institutions being able to snatch up everything from smaller communities. So there's an ethical guideline that says you should only be collecting from your geographic zone or within your collections policy. So our collections policy for our museum is Southwest Oxford and Zora Township. If someone comes to me with something from Woodstock, although it might really make some connections to what happened in the Beachville district, it has to first be offered to the Woodstock Museum. They would have to say, we don't want it, and then it could come back to me as an offer. So just be thinking, if you're trying to think of your homes for heirlooms, really be thinking about where did they come from, who are they significant to, go to that museum or archive first, because if you come to me, I will be happy to see you and meet you and hear about your artifact, but I will direct you to Woodstock before I say come on back. Do you see what I'm saying? So be making sure you're thinking about where you're bringing your stuff. The other things is we cannot collect items that are too far gone. And when I say too far gone, I mean they're irreparable. If you bring me something that's irreparable, it's unethical for me to collect it because it places too much strain on the resources of our institution. So if there's an artifact that I can't preserve, that I have to buy significantly more conservation materials for, or I have to have a designated cooler or freezer to preserve it, or I don't have a proper housing structure where I can maintain relative humidity, so I'd have to buy some new dehumidifiers and have a contained space for it, I can't take it. I can't take it because I can't preserve it. And it's unethical for me to say I'm going to take it and preserve it as a museum if I can't do that. So there's some pieces where we can't accept for that reason. So if you're making plans for your where your artifacts are going to go, your heirlooms are going to go, consult with your museum about what is within their collections policy and what is not. And really sometimes it's worth being receptive to like the reasons why. We're not just trying to say, I don't want your stuff. We're trying to run institutions responsibly, and when we say that, it means I have an obligation to the 15,000 artifacts that are already in my care, okay? So I have to be thinking, if you're bringing me something that's in poor condition that might have a pest presence, I can't introduce that to my collection, right? So there might be things that you're thinking, oh, you could just clean it. It's like, there might not be the resources for that. So, make those plans with an awareness of, and in consultation with the institution you're hoping to donate it for. Okay, we're at 8 o'clock. I'm going to show you one example of if you are bringing something to a museum. They've said, yes, we want it, it's amazing, it's wonderful. This is our gift form. So anytime you're donating to an official museum in the province, they should have some form of gift form that you're going to fill out with them. We are not allowed to acquire objects or heirlooms or any sort of historic object into our collection without a transfer of ownership. That means you have to give it to us legally. And so we have to have paperwork saying, yes, I agree to do that. So in getting this gift form for you, we're getting a description of the object, and we're getting a history of the object, and we're getting all your information. This is also where you would say, this was my mother's, I'd like for it to be donated in her name, I'm just the representative, whatever it might be. This is where you're telling us that story that you've already collected. This is where we're making sure everything you've given us has been taken stock of, clearly. Okay, I gave you 2 sets of gloves, I gave you 1 family photo, I gave you 5 garments. That should all be clearly outlined in the gift form of whatever institution you're donating to, an archive, a museum, a historical society. If you're not being offered this paperwork, think twice and make sure you're asking about their accessioning policies or their intake policies. This is an awful scan of our earlier gift form. Now what you'll notice in this format is this donation from 1983. This is the item that was given to us, an army uniform and overcoat. Here's the donor, signature of the museum. What's missing? The story.
Yeah.
The story. So the format of the form did not even lend itself for that story being collected back then, right? So we have an army uniform that we don't have any story attached to. So again, if you're looking at their donor form and they're not taking that story, print yours off, email it to them and say, here it is, so they can attach it to it, but you really want to see a donor form that's taking into consideration that story. Our old one did not do that. These are awful. And then this is an example of another donor form. Okay, notice 3 scrapbooks. Here's the donor information. What's the story? I don't know. The donor didn't fill it out. The museum rep didn't ask for it. It's not there. Here's another example of one we got. Tablecloth or bed cover. Not sure. What's the story? Great-grandmothers. Okay, when you're donating this stuff, please, 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 it is the museum's responsibility to ask you for the information, and they have. By asking you to fill out the form, they've asked you for that information. This doesn't do it. This doesn't do it. Your family heirlooms are so much more important than this. I don't even know if it's her great-grandmother from her mom's side or her dad's side. I couldn't track, who it was. If you say it was my mother's name was so-and-so. She was born on this date. She died on this date. That allows us to properly keep track of who it belonged to and what the significance is. So make sure you're doing your due diligence to add that information in. All done, folks. We made it. All right, we are at 8:03. I will leave it to general consensus. Who's ready for refreshments and we can mingle and you can ask your questions to me? I'll stick around and that lets everybody get up after the hour. Is that okay with everybody?
But we need to hear the answers as well to what they're gonna ask.
Okay, so do we want to do a short question period? Let's give it maybe like 10 minutes. Everybody got endurance for that? Okay, let's do a 10-minute public question period. And then outside of that, we can also talk after the fact too. And I'm here Monday through Friday every week. So if you feel like you don't get your question in or there wasn't enough conversation tonight, send us an email. We've got 3 wonderful full-time staff here that are all able and happy to talk to you about your heirlooms. Okay, questions?
Does the museum have a digital archive? So if I have a wonderful photograph of Beachville in 1900, can I email that to you and you put it away somewhere?
We do. So again, timing is really important for that. A lot of museums and heritage institutions there's been a big push from the Ontario Museum Association, the Canadian Museum Association, as well as the ministry to start digitizing. We're in a digital age. Our particular historical society runs digitization days every year where we try to encourage people to digitize their resources, and they'll still walk away with those heirlooms. We're not looking to retain the original copies, although you could still attach a note to it saying, you know, when I'm done with it, it should go here. But those digital resources we have in what's called our reference library, and it's all on in digital format on the computer. So, and that's really accessible for researchers, which is great. It's also something that's super searchable as far as having those files that have file names that are very searchable. So yes, if you have something you'd like to email us, we will definitely add it to the reference library. And similarly, we would still want the story attached to who's in the photo, where did it come from, where might the original have, you know, been retained, things like that for long storage. And for that, just as a quick piece on digital preservation, if you are looking to preserve your own documents and keep those on your computer, try to save them as a TIFF format. You guys might be familiar with, you know, Word documents or PDFs or all those file attachments at the end. TIFF is your most stable option for digital preservation.
Because those things change over the years.
They do, and digital files can deteriorate as well. So TIFF is the most stable as far as the and that's, you will find stuff about that as well on the CCI website if you're looking for more information on digital preservation. We can't cover that here tonight, but the archives in particular are very much at the forefront of doing that digitization work. And the major piece of advice I would say is try to store in TIFF format.
I'm just curious, do you ever pay for something? Like if I got Napoleon's overcoat, you know, by chance.
Napoleon's overcoat I would not take because Napoleon has nothing to do with Beachville, Ontario, so it would have to go somewhere else. But if it's of high value, there are instances, most museums will have what they call acquisitions funds, and they will purchase items, and that's usually, I mean, again, when I talk about the collections policy of the museum, there will certainly be outlined guidelines as to how the acquisition funds are used, but many institutions will also purchase items of high significance, and through that process issue donation receipts as well for tax purposes. So there are different processes by which purchases are made. Yeah.
This is a little bit off the subject, but what I've done is my kids don't want anything now, but on the back of every picture is where I got it from and how much its value may be worth, and do not put it on the garage sale kind of thing, you know? Because that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
They're just gonna see, you know?
Yeah. No, and all of that labeling work takes a lot of time and a lot of thought, right? But it's part of, the whole topic tonight is how to make sure your heirlooms make it to the next generation. And some of it, we see it here all the time, is that we have so many visitors to this museum that in their 50s and 60s go, I wish I'd asked more questions. I wish I'd talked to my grandparents about this. I remember her saying something about this, but I wasn't interested at the time and I didn't pay attention. And so those notes, even if your kids are saying to you right now, I don't want none of this stuff, even if you're trying to talk to them about it and they're going, their eyes are rolling to their back of their head, keep in mind that most of us have greater appreciation for our history and our family history and our stories as we get a little bit older. And oftentimes they're too late, right, to reaching that point of interest. It's seen all over the place. We see it every day at the museum, you know, and it's sad because at the point when someone wants to share, they're not ready to receive, right? So those notes you might think are not important yet, and it's for nothing, but that's not, I doubt that's going to be the case. They're going to find it, they're going to go, wow, this is so cool, you know?
Yeah, later on, you
Yeah,
know, when
later.
you're young, you don't know. I
No.
mean, they drive me off to see some relatives, and now I know where they belong on the family tree.
Yes.
And at that time, I just sit still and, you know, be bored, and I didn't know who they were.
Yes.
And now I can't ask.
Yeah. And that's a very, I think it's more universal experience than we recognize, right? You feel like that you're in that alone when you're in the older generation, you're trying to get the young people to engage in it, right? But yeah, and it happens so often that people will come here and just lament, like just they're so sad they didn't ask more questions or they didn't listen, right?
Yeah.
And so often then the feeling of the older generation is, well, they don't care. They're never gonna care. Why would I put all this work into writing down the history if nobody wants it and nobody cares? You don't wanna put the work in for no reason. But it's a it's like a wrong time, right? Like it just happens at the wrong time. And yeah, so often it's not accessible anymore by the time you do care about it, so.
What I'm doing is I bought 2 archival boxes and I'm doing a cross-section for a grandson who's 15 now and another one who's 18, who are in the same position. I don't need this stuff, but I'm creating a story in it, and I've talked to the museum here about archival paper and so on, and Sydney says make sure you put the labels on the outside of the box, don't put them on the object, because my son was told by Doug's grandmother that until you get married, this quilt is in this cupboard and it's for you, and no. And we have a picture of him when he finally chose his partner, hugging this. But you couldn't have told him as a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old that
No.
this was important to your grandmother and we're passing it along. And I hope to create that atmosphere for my grandsons so that when they choose a partner, I won't be here, but something will be here to go on.
I have a, excuse me, large vintage motorcycle collection. And a large vintage guns, so I can't give that.
No.
Be a big box.
So what I'm doing is I'm converting it into currency, dollars. And to my daughter, who's very stable, she's getting early inheritance. And I don't get taxed, and neither does she.
Yeah.
Also, to the grandkids, it goes for education only. And, that way there, you have a little bit of control over it.
So you had to do a lot of research to figure out how to navigate all of that, or who did you
Well-
consult for that?
The vintage motorcycles, I grew up in the industry. And when you buy them extremely cheap, and then you restore them, and you're in my house, they're all over. Eventually, I know I'm not gonna be around forever, and I really don't want anybody driving them. So they've gotta be turned, there is a demand for them in Canada and other countries. So the trouble is, I do invest a lot. The Canadian currency may be taking a dive. So you may not wanna be in the Canadian currency.
You know, there's so much to think about, and I think that and what you're highlighting is that every collection is different, right? Because if you come to me and ask me what do I do with my motorcycle collection, I don't have those connections, right? But there are organizations and there are individuals that would be in the similar collecting field that would have that expertise and have gone through the ups and downs of how to tend to that collection. One of the things we have experienced with our institution is individuals who've had large collections that they want to donate. And again, it falls under our collections policy to say, do we have capacity for that? And sometimes we don't. If you brought me a motorcycle collection today, I'd be going, I don't have a building for those, and I'm certainly not gonna leave them out on the front lawn. So there's a lot of negotiations that have to do for planning for things like that. And I think it's really important that there are certain things, like the firearms in particular, there's a lot of laws, right, that are in place about where those can go
Well,
and how you can distribute them.
That all has to be, even the motorcycles, there is ownerships and, bill of sales and stuff like that, which I have all. But, giving some family heirlooms is easy, some things are more complicated.
Yeah, and understanding the legalities are important because again, it's part of the plan, right? We're talking about the plan for these things, and you're having to research to determine to properly transfer these, what do I have to look at? And some of those laws are changing, right? So you could plan for it 10 years ahead of when you need to, and by the time you do it, some of the laws have changed, right? So I think that that's a really important description of A, how you have to do the research to make the plan, right? And then B, how every distinct item might have its own legalities attached to it or paperwork attached to it. And so that extra time to do that planning and consulting, like your wishes are determined. You're like, I don't want people driving these. Well, you know that you could sell it to someone who's not gonna honor that wish. What you want to do is find the person, or as you said, your family members who know your wishes and are gonna honor them, right?
Well, the person that buys it, I hope they do drive it.
Oh.
I just don't want my family driving it.
Even like I said, having your wishes understood is really important, and some of that aligns with what I was saying about one of those news articles about your family might be, the plan to keep it in your family might not be the plan too, right? Sometimes that is the goal, is to say, well, I want my kid to want this, or I want my grandkid to want this. In some cases, that's not gonna happen, and in some cases, there might be someone who's gonna buy it or wants to own it that's gonna be way more passionate about it, as I said with the example of the taxidermy, than maybe your own daughter or son or granddaughter or grandson. So, yeah, it can be really interesting. There's a lot to consider. Yeah.
Back in 1933, my grandmother and my mother looked after orphans. And my mother saved all those pictures. There were well over 150 pictures. I scanned them and put them together, and I contacted the archives in The Hague. And I put them in a photo album. I sent it to The Hague, and it's now, you can look at the pictures on their website, and my hope is that, and I had no way of them telling me, but the hope that maybe some children see their parents that in those pictures.
Yeah, and what's important too is that you can kind of see with our document up here, I mean you can't, but here it says to be completed in triplicate, or there should be a museum copy, a donor copy, and an off-site copy, and even here it's distinguished as copy 2. This paperwork, based on best practices for museums, if you donated something, you should get a paper document back, like a copy of it, so that you can share with your family to say this is where it went, okay? But the other piece that Bert is highlighting is he's particularly satisfied that it's accessible now, right? So he donated it and he can see it online. If that's really important to you, again, you have to ask those questions when you're donating. Because there's so many people that we've met who've donated items to local archives or local museums and go, I donated that 15 years ago for my grandpa and it's not on display. I go in all the time and it's not there. I've never seen it on display. And it's like, after we've had this conversation, you might be asking me, why is my grandma's wedding dress not on display? And I'm going, do you want it to turn gold? Because I don't want it to turn gold. But so those conversations, sometimes if someone donates something to me and says, is it gonna go on display? I go, I don't know. I gotta do the research to determine if it's safe for that. It might go on display for 5 years and then has to go on a rest period. It might not be in a state where it should be displayed. Maybe it's corroding, but it still has a lot of historic significance. This ledger has invaluable information in it. We're not gonna get rid of it, but it's not doing well because of the red rot, right? The leather is not doing well. So I wouldn't display it if someone's saying, can I donate this? But I'm preserving it. So ask those questions too. If it being available is absolutely essential to you, make sure you're asking that question. Will it be available to the public? In what format will it be available? On what regularity? Okay? Because it's way easier to ask those questions up front than to just for 15, 20 years afterwards go, I'm so ticked off. I donated that there. That was my plan. I thought they were going to do something wonderful with it, and I haven't seen it since. And my kids don't even know where it is, So think about that as well. If it's really important for you that it's available, then again, sometimes it's great to ask, can I send you a digital copy, right? Because sometimes that is the more accessible method, right? For people to be able to access it and see it and learn from it, do the research off of it. So
I hate to bring this up, but, excuse me, I think the significance of all these items that we have that came from our parents, even if we know the story behind them, it's meaningful to us.
Yeah.
But give it 3 generations they're gonna say,
My kids don't.
what the heck, we don't even know those people, we don't know where they're buried, we don't know that story.
Yeah.
So, if it's a buffet or something that weighs 400 pounds, it's not gonna be kept.
Yeah, and that's some of that conversation, like I showed you the example of the doily and the two twin beds, you know, that family's not saying, oh yeah, I'm so eager to take this twin bed because I want to sleep with my husband on this twin bed. It's not realistic, right? It doesn't make sense. But that's where I say some of that creative thinking and planning with your family members, and that's really sad too, because the example of, say, the husband and wife, where the wife said, I want my son to have this when I pass, and the husband's trying to honor that request, and when the husband and the son finally have that conversation, it becomes a point of conflict because the conversation wasn't had ahead by the mother and the son. So that conversation has to happen, the creative planning needs to happen. Some of it is unrealistic, and sometimes, as I said, yeah, someone might not want your wardrobe, but there's someone out there who does want your wardrobe, you know, that has that particular interest. And things like eBay and things like the internet help you find, but you have to have the time and you have to put in the work to find that particular right place for it to go, right? So I understand, like, we get so many people coming through that have collections of China, say, you know, this is such a beautiful collection of China. There's 50 pieces in it, and my grandma always had it. You know, how many times do you see those China sets? There's no place for them to go, right? Like, nobody's eating off China sets like that anymore, and no one, I mean, they're huge sets, right? So that's a particular one that we see a lot of, that people just lament. It's just not a thing anymore, right? Nobody's getting China sets for their weddings, so, yeah, yeah.
It's a shame in a way, but the new things keep coming up.
You know, people keep on living, life keeps on going, so, and you know, every generation goes through it, but that's where you can really help with that kind of, if the mentality right now is nobody cares, and part of it is saying they might down the road, right, as we all get older we gain more appreciation, they might, having that hope is really important, and also sitting down and having the conversations, because something that doesn't matter to your kid right now, the more you're like, yeah, but did you know this happened with this, and did you know this happened with this, and look, I'm going to show you, this is a picture of so-and-so who used that. The more you take the time to build that attachment, when I talk about the heirloom challenge, part of that challenge is building that attachment, not just expecting them to have it, right? Like, you should really like this family heirloom. It's so significant. Well, they're under no obligation to see it the way you see it. But the more you spend time with them, maybe make it significant, you know? We leave these heirlooms up on a shelf and say, it's really important, it's really important. But what if every year at their birthday, they got to eat their favorite dish out of that dish? Now, it's not just an heirloom that was sitting on a shelf, it's something that they always ate their birthday dinner out of. So now you've made that family heirloom significant to them, right? So just complacently expecting the next generation to appreciate what we say is a family heirloom, there can be some work put into building that attachment and not just assuming the attachment's going to be there, right?
Yeah, you shouldn't assume.
Yeah, expect. All right,